Since time immemorial, humanity has recounted encounters and experiences with mysterious beings, entities that seem to exist in a parallel dimension or on some plane beyond our ordinary senses. In stories from various cultures, these entities are sometimes described as protectors, other times as indifferent observers, and occasionally as predators. These narratives, though often treated as mythology or folklore, contain an enigma that continues to fascinate scholars and seekers of the unknown. Throughout history, many have believed that these beings subtly influence the course of humanity, inspiring knowledge or provoking fear and control. This theme has resurfaced in different eras when societies face deep questions about the purpose and origin of human life. The enigmatic beings that visit our world in stories and legends hold a peculiar role in the fabric of our history. Their influence is an issue that goes beyond simple superstition, as it touches on the essence of what it means to be human and our place in the cosmos. These beings, described under different names depending on the culture, have been seen as divine figures, as angels or demons, and, in modern times, even as extraterrestrials. Their presence seems to have a recurring pattern. They show an interest in our evolution, or at least in some aspects of it, and sometimes intervene in ways that range from the subtle to the completely dramatic. In the scriptures, these beings also appear in ambiguous roles, either as protectors of certain people or, on the contrary, as entities that place harsh tests on humanity. Some scholars, based on their research, begin to question whether what we call gods or angels in ancient texts are merely interpretations of interaction with these mysterious beings. Each culture, in some way, has transmitted the notion that humanity has been observed or influenced for a long time by invisible beings. This raises fundamental questions about human free will and the nature of our relationship with these invisible observers. In our present, we see the fascination with these beings reflected in literature, cinema, and modern conspiracy theories, leading us to wonder if our current beliefs about aliens and other intelligences are merely a continuation of these ancient tales. What role do these figures really play in our lives? From a spiritual perspective, some believe these beings help us grow, guide us toward truth, or protect us from greater threats. However, there are also many stories of encounters with these beings that end in fear, confusion, or even loss, casting doubt on their intentions. This dual nature, between guidance and threat, makes the presence of these beings in our human history shrouded in mystery and controversy. Religion and spirituality, when speaking of angels and demons, also address this duality, representing an almost incomprehensible good and evil that often govern our actions and desires. In this context, some people feel a deep spiritual connection with these beings, as if they were invisible guardians or companions in our evolution. In other cases, however, they are seen as a threat, something to be feared and avoided at all costs. These reactions make us think about how these stories are intertwined with our own beliefs and fears as humanity. Some believe that these mysterious encounter stories reflect our own internal fears and our desire for something higher to guide us. Thus, as we evolve, these beings also change their role in our lives. They are no longer seen solely as myths or superstitions, but as a real possibility of an intelligence that inhabits our world. It is possible that, with advances in science and technology, we are closer to discovering the truth behind these stories. Robert Kirk, a tireless researcher, delved into these questions in a time of history when society was much more rigid and skeptical of such ideas. Despite the risks, his curiosity and commitment led him to explore dangerous territories, challenging the beliefs of his time and documenting his findings in a way that still resonates today. The question of whether these beings are truly good, bad, or neutral remains unanswered. We may never know their intentions with certainty, but Kirk's research and that of others who have followed in his footsteps invite us to explore these possibilities. Today, the renewed interest in spirituality and energy opens this door to the unknown again, where ancient and modern concepts meet and intertwine. Facing the possibility of beings coexisting with us leads us to question whether we are truly alone or if, in some way, we have always been accompanied. Robert Kirk was a pioneer in paranormal and supernatural research. Born in a time when skepticism about these subjects was at its peak, Kirk nonetheless dedicated much of his life to documenting accounts of encounters with non-human beings. Despite his religious background and respect for traditional teachings, he did not limit his understanding to a strict interpretation of the scriptures. He believed that supernatural experiences, common in his community, had a real basis and deserved to be studied objectively. This open approach allowed him to gather numerous testimonies from people who claimed to have seen or interacted with these beings. In his writings, Kirk conveyed not only a deep respect for his sources, but also an insatiable curiosity to uncover the truth behind these accounts. He was one of the first to attempt a more scientific perspective on supernatural phenomena. Kirk was aware of the risks he took in challenging the established beliefs of his time. His research included not only non-human beings, but also psychic phenomena like clairvoyance and precognition, aspects we now call second sight. To him, these abilities were not signs of witchcraft or superstition, but represented a connection to a reality that most people could not perceive. The accounts he collected seemed to suggest that certain individuals were able to see and communicate with beings from another dimension. This broad and unconventional view for his time won him admirers and detractors alike. While some valued his bravery, others considered his ideas dangerous and even heretical. Despite the criticism, Kirk remained true to his vocation, leaving a legacy that today allows us to approach the enigma of these beings with an open and critical mind. Kirk's work reflects not only his love of knowledge, but also a deep empathy for the people of his community. He listened attentively to their stories, respecting the truth of their experiences, and offering a perspective that validated their experiences. Many of his contemporaries treated these accounts with skepticism, dismissing the experiences of common people as superstition or ignorance. However, Kirk believed that these stories held invaluable value and contained clues about an invisible reality. His method of investigation, which we would now consider qualitative, was revolutionary at the time, as he considered oral testimonies as valuable evidence. This close connection with people and respect for their personal experiences allowed him to build a solid base of stories that still intrigue researchers and seekers of the occult. In addition to his investigations of paranormal phenomena, Kirk was an accomplished theologian and linguist. He dedicated much of his life to translating the Bible into Scottish Gaelic, a project aimed at making the scriptures accessible to his community. This work reflected his commitment both to his faith and to his community, earning him great respect among his contemporaries. However, his interest in paranormal phenomena and his more literal translation style put him in an ambiguous position with the Church. While some members of the religious community admired his dedication to the translations, others distrusted his beliefs about the supernatural. This dualism in his life reflects the conflict that often exists between traditional faith and the pursuit of knowledge, a topic that remains relevant today. Kirk was also a pioneer in the comparative study of mythologies and folklore. His work, The Secret Commonwealth of Elves, Fauns, and Fairies, explores how stories about supernatural beings are not unique to Scotland but appear in many cultures with different names and representations. This comparative approach was unusual at the time and shows how Kirk saw folklore as a valuable source of information about human nature and spirituality. By studying stories from distant cultures, such as Celtic and African traditions, Kirk was able to observe similar patterns in stories of abductions, visions, and encounters with non-human beings. This broad perspective allowed him to identify parallels that suggest a universal experience, something that many modern scholars of mythology and depth psychology consider an indication of a collective unconscious. In this sense, Kirk was a precursor to ideas later formulated by Carl Jung about archetypes and the unconscious. His legacy has left a mark on modern culture and paranormal studies. His book, published by Sir Walter Scott many years after his death, is a testament to his commitment to truth and his passion for understanding the unknown. Thanks to Kirk, we now have access to a valuable collection of stories and theories that allow us to approach the mysteries of our existence with a critical and inquisitive perspective. He planted the seed for a tradition of paranormal research that remains alive today. His bravery in challenging the prejudices of his time and his ability to listen to and respect people's experiences leave us with a lesson that remains relevant in our era. As we advance in exploring these topics, Kirk's legacy reminds us that we should not fear the unknown but approach it with an open mind and a curious spirit. One of the darkest and most disturbing aspects of the stories documented by Robert Kirk involves the idea that certain non-human beings not only observe humans but feed on them. These stories speak of entities that extract certain chemicals from human bodies, usually from the blood or specific organs. According to some testimonies, these beings can generate intense fear in their victims, which seems to influence the type and quality of the substance extracted. Kirk was one of the first to record these episodes with the seriousness of an investigator, without mocking or judging the experiences of those who claim to have been victims of these predatory entities. This type of story has persisted to the present, with many modern accounts describing similar encounters. On a deep level, these stories evoke our most primitive human fears and raise questions about the true nature and motivations of these entities. Analyzing these stories, Kirk observed a disturbing coherence in the descriptions of these encounters. Victims often described a sense of energy loss after the encounter, as if something had been extracted from their interior. In many cases, the physical and mental exhaustion was so profound that it took days or weeks to recover. People involved in these stories sometimes describe these beings as ambiguous figures, humanoid in appearance but with no emotional expression. The indifference they show towards the pain or fear of their victims has been interpreted by some as a sign of their true predatory nature. Kirk, with his empathetic view, avoided giving a moralistic interpretation to these encounters and preferred to record the testimonies as presented, letting readers draw their own conclusions. To him, the most important thing was for these experiences to be heard and analyzed with respect. The idea of entities feeding on humans has parallels in several cultures. In Greek mythology, for example, there are references to Moirai and deities who influenced human destiny, often affecting life and death without showing compassion. African and Native American cultures also contain stories of spirits and entities that absorb the energy of the living in ways that are often fatal. This theme appears in modern stories of alleged alien abductions, where victims describe an extremely invasive physical and psychological experience. Although Kirk lived in a time before modern science, he observed that these stories of substance extraction were described in a way that suggested a specific knowledge of the human body. To him, this was an indication that the described entities had a special interest in certain physical or emotional aspects of their victims. Although there was no scientific explanation in the 17th century for these phenomena, Kirk related the stories to the experiences of physical and emotional exhaustion reported in encounters with beings of the second sight. People with this gift often could perceive beyond the obvious, but, as a result, became more vulnerable to external influences. This connection between second sight and energy depletion in supernatural encounters becomes a central theme in Kirk's research. As it is today, the scientific community of his time doubted these experiences, but Kirk believed that these stories held clues to lost knowledge, a truth found in the depths of folklore and human spirituality. His open and inquisitive stance led him to explore these connections with a bravery that even in our time remains inspiring. These types of stories have evolved in recent decades, adapting to current concepts and fears. While in Kirk's time these beings were considered elves or spirits, today many interpret these experiences as encounters with aliens. The idea of beings that extract energy or vital substances continues to live in our culture, from conspiracy theories to the world of science fiction. These parallels lead us to question whether we are facing a series of experiences that have accompanied humanity since ancient times, or if they are psychological phenomena influenced by cultural context. However, Kirk was careful not to rigidly categorize these experiences. He saw these stories as something worth studying, a phenomenon that, though unknown, deserves our attention and respect. By exploring these themes, Kirk invites us to face our deepest fears and examine the possibility that there are forces in the universe that we do not understand. The idea of beings feeding on humans evokes a range of emotions, from fear to fascination. It is possible that these stories reflect our own fears about the vulnerability of human life and about the existence of higher beings who may not necessarily have a positive interest in us. Through his research, Kirk raises questions that continue to resonate with humanity. What is the purpose of these beings? What do they really seek by interacting with us? In the end, his work invites us to keep an open mind and not to fear the unknown but to seek to understand it. One of the most surprising abilities attributed to these beings is their capacity to manipulate human perception. Kirk documented several cases where people claimed these entities could change shape and manipulate the senses of those who encountered them. These types of experiences were characterized by a sense of unreality, as if the victim were trapped in some kind of trance. People described how these entities took familiar forms, often of friends or relatives, to gain the person's trust. However, upon discovering their true nature, the victims experienced intense fear and deep confusion. This ability to alter perception is similar to stories from other cultures, where spirits or supernatural beings are said to assume any form to deceive humans. To Kirk, this capacity for sensory manipulation was further proof of the complexity of these beings and their intent to interact with the human world in ways that challenge our understanding. Kirk found stories where people saw figures that seemed real but disappeared or turned into shadows upon approach. These experiences left victims doubting what they had really seen. In some cases, those who had these encounters mentioned a kind of mist or fog that seemed to accompany the entity, a phenomenon that recurs in various supernatural descriptions. The ability of these beings to manipulate the senses also included the capacity to emit sounds or familiar voices, thus deceiving people and creating an experience of confusion and fear. To Kirk, this phenomenon of shape-shifting and sensory manipulation represented a challenge to human perception and to the beliefs of his time about what was possible in the physical world. These stories offered a window into a type of reality that seemed to exist parallel to ours, and Kirk took them as a serious and worthy aspect of study. Kirk noted that, in many cases, these beings seemed to adopt the form of animals or human figures to approach people more safely. Animals like cats, crows, or even dogs were frequently mentioned in these stories, creating a connection to Scottish and Celtic folklore, where these animals often have a special role in supernatural tales. In Asian cultures, for example, beings like the kitsune or foxes are said to change shape and assume human forms to interact with people. This ability to transform and deceive also appears in Greek mythology, where sirens or nymphs attract humans with promises of beauty and love only to lead them to their ruin. Kirk saw in these parallels evidence that these phenomena were not unique to Scotland but resonated universally, deserving exploration and understanding. By observing these stories, Kirk realized that the manipulation of the senses by these beings seemed to have a specific purpose: to make people lower their defenses, facilitating their interaction. In many cases, people described a kind of trance, as if they had lost the ability to think critically. This type of manipulation can also be found in biblical accounts of visions and mystical experiences, where prophets describe seeing figures that later disappear or transform. For Kirk, these similarities were not coincidences but indications that these beings could be present in the scriptures and in human history in a way that had not yet been interpreted. Their ability to change shape and manipulate the senses also seemed to have a psychological component, where people felt attracted or fascinated by these entities despite feeling fear or confusion. The ability of these beings to take on different forms not only confuses people but also challenges our understanding of reality. Kirk was deeply interested in the relationship between these experiences and the functioning of the human mind. Today, studies on the brain and perception have shown that our minds can easily be influenced by external stimuli, and that our perception of reality is more flexible than we think. This suggests that Kirk was ahead of his time in considering that these phenomena could have an explanation beyond simple superstition. To Kirk, these encounters represented an opportunity to better understand the limits of the human mind and the possibility that alternate realities exist that only some people can access through second sight or altered perception experiences. Kirk documented that this capacity for sensory manipulation and shape-shifting was not always used with benevolent intentions. In some stories, people who had encounters with these beings felt pursued or even harmed. However, he also recorded experiences where people felt a deep and even comforting connection with these beings, describing them as guides or protectors. This ambivalence in experiences led Kirk to view these encounters with a mix of respect and caution, prompting him to wonder if these beings had their own goals and a morality different from that of humans. To him, studying these phenomena was essential to better understand humanity's relationship with these beings. His observations today invite us to consider whether these stories reflect something more than just myths or legends, something that could be intrinsically linked to human perception and our reality. Robert Kirk, in his study of the scriptures and other ancient texts, began to notice a surprising similarity between the gods mentioned in the Bible and the Anunnaki of Sumerian tablets. The latter were known as gods, or those who descended from heaven, powerful beings who influenced human destiny from their position of authority. In Genesis and other biblical books, heavenly figures are mentioned descending to earth and maintaining close interactions with humanity. This similarity led Kirk to reflect on whether these biblical figures were truly gods in a spiritual sense, or if they might represent physical entities that coexisted with humans. The possibility that the scriptures narrated encounters with advanced or intelligent beings from other realities or dimensions challenged traditional interpretations, opening the door to theories that continue to generate interest and debate even today. The figure of the Anunnaki, as beings who descended and exerted influence on human affairs, is one of the oldest representations of entities that govern and guide the destiny of peoples. To Kirk, the parallels between these deities and the gods of Genesis represented a key to understanding the true nature of these beings. The account of the Nephilim, mentioned in the book of Genesis as giants and sons of God, who united with humans, resonated with Sumerian accounts of the Anunnaki, who also intimately interacted with humans. In Kirk's context, these stories were not merely myths but vestiges of an ancient relationship between the human and the divine, or between humans and superior beings who were not of this world. He saw in these stories a bridge between spirituality and the possible existence of a race of advanced beings with unknown intentions toward humanity. Kirk's vision allowed him to see these ancient writings from a different perspective. He did not interpret them exclusively as tales of faith, but as descriptions of events that may have taken place in the distant past. In this way, Genesis and other religious books were not only spiritual teachings but a source of knowledge about beings who, according to Kirk, truly interacted with humans. In this sense, Kirk anticipated the theory of ancient astronauts, which postulates that advanced civilizations visited Earth in remote times and left a profound influence on our cultures and religions. To him, the gods might have been physical beings with advanced powers or knowledge, who left an indelible mark on humanity. His interpretation of the scriptures in relation to the Anunnaki suggests that these ancient gods were not divinities in the traditional sense, but beings who somehow manipulated or guided early human civilizations. Kirk found support in several ancient cultures, whose stories included deities descending from the skies to interact with humans, providing them with knowledge or helping them develop. In ancient Egyptian scriptures, for example, gods like Osiris and Thoth are mentioned as bearers of superior knowledge. Pre-Columbian myths include similar figures, such as the Viracochas and the Mayan gods, who taught humans essential skills. This type of parallel led Kirk to consider that the presence of these beings was not exclusive to the Bible or Sumerian cultures, but was deeply rooted in the collective memory of humanity. In his analysis, these stories represented not only spiritual beliefs but real experiences that influenced the development and identity of different civilizations. These coincidences reinforced his theory that humanity may have been shaped by an intelligent presence of unknown origin. The figure of the Anunnaki has inspired countless theories and assumptions in modern times about the true nature of these ancient gods. Some believe these stories prove that advanced civilizations visited Earth to interact or even manipulate human development. To Kirk, the scriptures provided sufficient evidence of the influence of non-human beings in human history. He perceived that beneath the apparent simplicity of the biblical texts lay deep and secret messages. By questioning the strictly spiritual interpretation of the scriptures, Kirk touched on a topic that remains a great interest. Could it be that our past is filled with encounters with advanced beings who, rather than gods, were simply visitors from another world? His work suggests so, and that these figures shaped our civilization in ways we are still far from fully understanding. In the end, Kirk's analysis leaves us with a disturbing question. If these beings existed, what was their true purpose in influencing humanity? Did they seek to elevate our level of consciousness and knowledge, or did they have less altruistic intentions? The idea that ancient gods were not spiritual deities but powerful beings from another reality poses a profound challenge to our understanding of history and religion. By examining the scriptures from an open and critical perspective, Kirk invites us to reconsider the role of these beings in human history. His work reminds us that studying ancient legends and sacred texts can reveal a more complex and enigmatic view of our past, one that makes us question the boundaries between the human and the divine. The life and work of Robert Kirk were surrounded by mystery, and his death was no exception. In 1692, Kirk's body was found on the hill of Dunhill, Scotland, in circumstances that generated a series of rumors and conspiracy theories. Although the official verdict ruled his death as natural, the local community began to speculate that his death was related to his research on non-human beings. It was said that Kirk was about to reveal information about these invisible entities, and some believed that these beings, or perhaps even the church, had silenced him to prevent his discoveries from coming to light. The lack of a clear cause for his death fueled the idea that Kirk had been killed because of his findings, making his death a subject of speculation and mystery to this day. The community of Aberfoyle, where Kirk lived, was known for its deep belief in the supernatural and stories of mysterious beings that inhabited the hills and forests. These stories reflected the spiritual and cultural life of the region, in which elves, fauns, and other creatures were considered part of the natural environment. After Kirk's death, many locals began to report seeing strange figures around the hill where he was found. In popular belief, the idea that Kirk had been taken or called by these entities so as not to reveal their secrets took hold. Belief in the second sight, which allows certain individuals to see beyond visible reality, reinforced this idea, as Kirk had studied this phenomenon extensively and might have been considered worthy of being taken by these supernatural forces. The theory that Kirk was killed or abducted to silence him is also fueled by the nature of his work. His research on the world of the Sith, as he called these non-human beings, touched on sensitive topics in a time of religious fervor in Scotland when skepticism and persecution of those with different ideas was a reality. Kirk's translations and publications, which offered a literal interpretation of the scriptures, had already placed him in a controversial position. His death, in this context, seemed convenient for those who feared his discoveries about these invisible beings would question traditional beliefs and ecclesiastical authority. Kirk had dedicated years to studying and documenting the experiences of people who claimed to have witnessed paranormal phenomena and encounters with non-human entities. His work reflected a deep respect for folklore and supernatural experiences, which he did not consider superstitions but knowledge passed down through generations. However, this open approach was seen as a threat by those who promoted a rigid and strict interpretation of faith. To Kirk, testimonies about the Sith and other beings were remnants of ancient wisdom that deserved to be investigated and understood. This perspective, so innovative for its time, made him an uncomfortable figure. His tragic end, in this sense, seemed the result of a man who dared to explore the limits of the known. The manuscript Kirk left remained hidden for more than a century after his death until writer Sir Walter Scott published it in 1815. For many, this detail seemed to confirm that Kirk had been close to discovering something important, something considered too dangerous for society at that time. His manuscript, titled The Secret Commonwealth of Elves, Fauns, and Fairies, revealed his discoveries about the existence of an invisible world inhabited by beings who could interact with humans in ways that defy our understanding. The fact that this work remained unpublished for so long reinforced the idea that someone had wanted to hide his findings. To this day, this mystery continues to be a subject of fascination, and Kirk's story still inspires those who believe there are invisible forces influencing our reality. Kirk's death and the posthumous publication of his work raise the possibility that certain knowledge has been suppressed or distorted to maintain control over human thought. Kirk's life, tragic end, and literary legacy invite reflection on the nature of these forces that seem always on the fringe of our understanding. Perhaps his death was only the beginning of a series of investigations and theories seeking to continue the path he traced. Kirk remains an enigmatic figure, a pioneer who risked his life to seek the truth and explore the mysteries of existence. The possibility that he was silenced for his discoveries serves as a reminder that the pursuit of knowledge often faces obstacles, but that in the end, truth finds its way into the light. The second sight, a well-known concept in Scottish and Celtic culture, represents the ability of certain people to see beyond visible reality, allowing them to foresee future or distant events. In the Scottish Highlands, this ability was considered a powerful and respected gift, though also feared. Robert Kirk, deeply interested in this phenomenon, saw it as a link between the human and spiritual worlds, or even between our reality and other dimensions. Throughout his life, Kirk heard numerous accounts from people who claimed to have had experiences with the second sight. These visions not only allowed them to see distant events, but also glimpsed non-human beings that inhabited dimensions invisible to most. Kirk recorded these accounts with a seriousness unusual for his time, convinced that the second sight was a real phenomenon worthy of study. To Kirk, the second sight was not a supernatural ability in the sense of magic, but a perception that all humans possess to some degree, though only some manage to develop. People gifted with this sight were seen as intermediaries between our world and others. These seers could often see invisible presences, observe future events, and even predict someone's death by seeing their double or spirit in the days before. These profound experiences, instead of being dismissed as superstitions, represented for Kirk a manifestation of a hidden reality, a connection with dimensions that exist alongside ours. The second sight was woven into the daily life of his community and local traditions, providing a perspective that Kirk interpreted as evidence of the existence of beings and parallel realities. The link between the second sight and Kirk's faith is another fascinating aspect of his studies. Although he was a pastor, Kirk did not consider the second sight to contradict the principles of religion. Rather, he saw it as a complement. For him, this ability was not something opposed to faith, but an extension of spirituality, a tool that allowed humans to approach the divine and the transcendent. From his perspective, the biblical prophets and mystics of various religions seem to have had access to this vision, and their experiences constituted a confirmation of its existence. In the scriptures, Kirk found mentions of precognition and prophecy phenomena that reminded him of the second sight accounts of his parishioners. This led him to wonder if the Bible contained veiled references to this human capacity, a connection with the invisible that remains misunderstood today. The accounts of the second sight also included experiences of communication with non-human beings, which sometimes presented themselves to seers in a friendly manner, while at other times were feared for their unknown nature. People with this ability not only saw spirits or entities, but often felt a direct influence from these beings on their lives. Some described how these visions led them to perform out-of-the-ordinary acts or conveyed messages that seemed to come from another world. To Kirk, these interactions were not fantasies, but examples of how these beings attempted to communicate or influence the human plane. Through his studies, Kirk saw the second sight as a kind of door, that allowed certain people to see and feel what most could not. This door, however, was a double-edged sword, for those who possessed it lived in a constant state of connection with the unknown. The second sight was also a controversial and delicate topic in Kirk's time. While many viewed this ability with respect, others considered it a sign of witchcraft or heresy, and those who claimed to possess it risked persecution. The church and society of his time were skeptical and often interpreted visions as mere superstitions. However, Kirk, as a pastor, took a different approach. Instead of condemning these accounts, he welcomed them with empathy and curiosity. His studies on the second sight challenged the religious norms of his time and demonstrated his commitment to seeking the truth beyond prejudice. To Kirk, the second sight was a divine gift, a direct connection with the mystery of life and death that we all, in some way, share but few fully experience. In our era, the second sight has been interpreted from a psychological perspective, with theories that attempt to explain these experiences as internal phenomena of the human mind. However, Kirk's perspective still resonates with those who believe in the existence of invisible worlds and in the possibility that humanity is in constant contact with other dimensions. By studying and documenting these phenomena, Kirk left us an invaluable testimony about the power of human perception and the connection between the visible and the invisible. His research on the second sight is an invitation to explore the depths of our consciousness and to open ourselves to the possibility that there are other realities alongside ours. In the end, Kirk reminds us that although many dismiss these stories as superstition, there is ancient wisdom in these experiences that deserves to be heard. The book The Secret Commonwealth of Elves, Fauns, and Fairies is perhaps Robert Kirk's most famous work and the culmination of his research on supernatural beings. In this manuscript, Kirk details his findings on a series of mysterious entities known in Scottish folklore as the Sith. To Kirk, these beings were not simply characters in popular tales but real entities that lived in a parallel world to ours. His book compiles testimonies from people who claim to have had encounters with these beings, describing their appearance, customs, and relationship with humans. Although the manuscript remained unpublished for more than a century, its eventual publication by Sir Walter Scott allowed the world to know Kirk's deep and careful work. This work represents a testament to his courage and commitment to the truth, as studying these topics in his time was risky and could have serious consequences. The term Sith, which Kirk used to describe these entities, has an archaic origin and a resonance that goes beyond language. In Scottish dialects, Sith referred to invisible beings or spirits from another world, while in other Celtic languages, similar terms designate these entities. Kirk believed that the folklore of his community was a valuable source of knowledge, and that stories about elves, fauns, and fairies contained clues about the true nature of these beings. His work reflects this conviction and represents a defense of popular knowledge and the oral traditions of his region. To Kirk, folklore was not something minor or unworthy of study, but a remnant of ancient wisdom that deserved to be preserved and explored. In this sense, his book is both an academic work and a tribute to Scotland's cultural richness. The book explores in detail the characteristics and behaviors of these beings. Kirk describes the Sith as entities that can take human forms, though they retain certain distinctive traits that reveal them, such as a special glow in their eyes or the lack of certain facial features. According to Kirk, these beings do not live in heaven or hell but in a parallel dimension that coexists with ours. In some cases, the Sith are described as guardians of nature and are believed to protect certain sacred places from human intervention. In other accounts, however, they are described as predators or entities indifferent to human feelings. To Kirk, this ambiguity in their intentions reflected the complexity of their nature and the difficulty of classifying these beings according to our moral categories. His book represents a window into a world that escapes our conventional conceptions and invites us to rethink our understanding of the natural and the supernatural. In his book, Kirk also addresses the relationship between non-human beings and people endowed with a second sight. Through these accounts, Kirk explores how these seers often describe the Sith as ambiguous and difficult to understand figures. Seers often speak of a mix of attraction and fear toward these beings, suggesting a complex relationship between the two worlds. Kirk saw in this relationship proof that humans and these beings shared a connection that went beyond the visible. His work, in this sense, is an exploration of the possibility that the world of the Sith and ours are interconnected in ways we cannot fully understand. By documenting these encounters, Kirk sought to offer an objective view, but also one open to the multiple interpretations these accounts allow, inviting readers to question the nature of these beings and their relationship with humanity. The publication of this manuscript in 1815 by Sir Walter Scott was a pivotal moment for Kirk's legacy. The work, which had been kept hidden for years, was finally recognized as a valuable contribution to the knowledge of the supernatural. In Scott's era, the publication of this book helped revive interest in Scottish folklore and ancient traditions, which were beginning to fade with the advance of modernity. This book not only preserved Kirk's knowledge but inspired future generations to study folklore and paranormal phenomena with a serious and respectful perspective. Today, The Secret Commonwealth of Elves, Fauns, and Fairies is considered a classic in the study of the supernatural and a precursor work in the analysis of what we would now call alternate realities, or parallel dimensions. Kirk's work remains a pillar in paranormal studies, and its influence extends to this day. His ability to listen to and document his community's stories with empathy and respect continues to inspire researchers around the world. Through his book, Kirk reminds us of the importance of approaching the unknown with an open mind, valuing popular wisdom, and questioning the limits of what we consider real. His work teaches us a lesson of humility and curiosity, reminding us that truth is not always found in the visible or tangible, but sometimes lies in the most hidden and mysterious places of our existence. Kirk invites us to enter the world of elves, fauns, and fairies, not as mere myths but as a possible reflection of a reality we are only beginning to understand. The stories Kirk collected about non-human beings, specifically those describing abduction experiences, are not unique to Scotland or his time. Various cultures around the world share stories that speak of mysterious beings who take humans to other places, whether in parallel dimensions or underground locations, often returning them later. In Scotland, these stories take the form of tales about elves and fairies who kidnap people, especially children, and take them to their world. However, in other cultures, we find surprising parallels. In the Philippines, there are stories of encantos, beings who also take people to unknown realms. In West Africa, the water goddess Mamiwata, an entity who also takes people. And in Caribbean cultures, there are similar figures who fulfill mysterious roles. Kirk realized that these stories of encounters with mysterious entities transcended borders, suggesting a universal experience in humanity. To Kirk, the coincidence of these stories in different cultures represented something more than simple coincidence or cultural influence. He saw in these stories evidence that perhaps all these peoples were describing a common experience, a real phenomenon existing at different points on the planet. This perspective allowed him to open his mind to the possibility that stories of abduction and encounters with non-human beings were not mere fables but fragments of a shared story that repeated across cultures. Analyzing these stories from a comparative approach, Kirk discovered that testimonies often included specific details, such as tempting promises of a better life that these beings made to humans. These offers of greater knowledge, health, or beauty echoed in testimonies from different cultures and eras, suggesting a common strategy by these beings to attract their chosen. The stories Kirk collected also included descriptions of the places people were taken to. In many cases, these places are described as underground or underwater spaces, environments that carry connotations of mystery and depth in many cultures. People taken by these beings sometimes described realms of unparalleled beauty, full of bright lights and vivid colors, but at the same time unusual and far from human nature. In Philippine stories, for example, the encantos also inhabit underground realms of indescribable wealth and beauty. This constant in different cultures led Kirk to wonder if the beings they spoke of might indeed have some connection, as if all shared a common origin or nature. To him, this idea of invisible realms to common perception was a key to understanding that human reality might be only one layer of a much more complex and extensive reality. Kirk also observed that abduction stories across cultures often accompanied significant changes in the lives of those who returned from these encounters. People often came back transformed, as if they had acquired special knowledge or different abilities. In many cases, these individuals described feeling marked or different after their experience, and their communities also perceived a change in them. In the Caribbean, it is said that those who return from the land of the encantos have special abilities, such as clairvoyance or healing ability. Kirk perceived these transformations as a sign that the beings responsible for the abductions might be attempting to leave some form of influence on humans, perhaps altering them in ways that escaped their control. This fascinating and at the same time disturbing aspect led him to wonder if these beings saw in humanity a species in development, and if these encounters were their way of experimenting or interacting with us. The variety of experiences and the impact these encounters had on people led Kirk to a profound reflection on the purpose of these beings. In some stories, abducted people described receiving special knowledge as if the beings wanted to elevate their intelligence or help them understand the world better. However, in other cases, the experience was traumatic, leaving the person weakened or with a sense of loss of control over their life. This ambivalence, which Kirk documents in great detail, shows that the interaction of these beings with humans does not always have a clear or obvious purpose. Perhaps these entities see in humans a potential we do not understand, or perhaps they consider us part of a larger ecosystem in which they also play a role. The complexity of these experiences makes Kirk's work still relevant today, as it raises fundamental questions about humanity's place in a universe full of mysteries. Today, abduction stories have evolved, and many interpret them as encounters with aliens rather than traditional supernatural beings. However, the essence of these experiences remains the same: encounters with entities from an unknown world that offer us a glimpse of something beyond our understanding. Kirk's research, though conducted in the 17th century, seems to anticipate the questions and modern theories about visitors from other worlds. His work reminds us that throughout history, humanity has had mysterious encounters that challenge our perception and reason. In the end, Kirk invites us to listen to these stories, not as superstitions but as possible clues to a reality beyond what we can comprehend but connected to the human soul in deep and mysterious ways. One of the most intriguing aspects of Kirk's studies is his hypothesis about the origin of non-human beings who, according to him, might live in underground or underwater bases. Unlike the modern perspective, which considers these beings as aliens from other planets, Kirk believed that these non-human beings existed on Earth but in realms or dimensions hidden from our common perception. The idea that these beings inhabit beneath the Earth's surface or at the bottom of oceans not only appears in Scottish folklore but is also common in other cultures. Hindu mythology, for example, describes underground realms like Patala, inhabited by mystical beings. Kirk considered these stories clues that, at some point in our history, humanity was in contact with intelligences that could exist in these hidden spaces. To Kirk, the existence of these underground and underwater realms could be related to experiences of abduction and inexplicable disappearances. According to some accounts, people who were taken by these beings described dark and deep places, often filled with water or surrounded by rocky walls, suggesting an underground environment. This coincidence in the accounts of different people led Kirk to consider the possibility that these beings used caves or natural tunnel systems as their habitat. The idea of an underground world, inaccessible to ordinary humans, represented a territory of mystery and potential danger. To Kirk, these places were not simply metaphors or symbols, but physical spaces that could be inhabited by unknown entities. This challenging approach shows how he perceived the supernatural world as something tangible but beyond our comprehension. The mystical traditions of theosophy, centuries after Kirk, revisited the idea of underground cities like Agartha, supposedly inhabited by advanced beings that only a few can access. This idea that there are hidden worlds beneath the earth has been recurrent in various religions and philosophies, from Nordic traditions to American ones. To Kirk, these global stories were further proof that the idea of an underground realm was deeply rooted in human consciousness and could not be dismissed as mere mythology. The similarities in descriptions of these underground places in different cultures gave Kirk the impression that it was a collective memory, a kind of ancestral knowledge all peoples retained. This concept of hidden places on Earth, inhabited by beings different from us, suggests the possibility that our reality has layers we have not fully discovered. Accounts of underwater bases also appear in several cultures. In Philippine legends, the Encantos are described as inhabitants of places at the bottom of the sea or large lakes, where they take people to show them a wonderful but unreachable world. In the Caribbean islands, some stories talk about islands or water-surrounded areas inhabited by spirits or mysterious beings. Kirk found these stories fascinating and saw a connection to his own people's accounts, where the Sith inhabited unexplored and unknown areas, whether in mountains or caves. The image of these underwater bases seemed especially relevant to him in an era when oceans were vast and little explored, allowing open minds to imagine secret places inhabited by beings of another nature. These stories reinforce the idea that the sea and the land harbor secrets and mysteries humanity has yet to uncover. Kirk speculated that these beings had inhabited the Earth since time immemorial, and that their influence on humanity might be much deeper than we can imagine. The idea that these beings exist on our planet but in spaces we do not directly perceive raises a disturbing possibility. Humanity has coexisted with other intelligences subtly and hiddenly, making it unperceived. This kind of thought challenges traditional ideas about the separation between the natural and the supernatural worlds and suggests that we are surrounded by mysteries our modern science has barely begun to explore. Today, with advancements in marine and terrestrial exploration, humanity continues to find unexplored places and unknown ecosystems, providing a new context to Kirk's ideas about these underground and underwater worlds. Finally, The idea of underground and underwater bases becomes a symbolic theme that raises questions about the limits of our knowledge and the reach of our perceptions. Kirk's work suggests that we should not only seek answers in the sky or the far reaches of outer space, but also in the depths of our planet, where answers to the nature of these beings and their relationship with humanity may be hidden. His perspective encourages us to explore the unknown with an open mind, question the certainties we have built, and remember that our own world contains realities we have just begun to understand. Kirk's research on these topics inspires us to expand our horizons and consider that our understanding of reality is still in development. One of the most fascinating and at the same time unsettling concepts that Robert Kirk documented in his research was the idea of hybridization between humans and non-human beings. In several stories he collected, people were said to have been taken by these beings and later returned with special abilities or characteristics as if they had been transformed or marked by their encounter. In some cases, these beings were said to seek humans to create offspring with them, generating a hybrid lineage that possessed traits of both species. This theme of hybridization is common in many cultures and has parallels in ancient mythologies, such as the Greek one, where gods united with mortals to produce heroes and demigods. Kirk found in these stories proof that the relationships between humans and non-human beings could have existed more deeply and physically than most would imagine. To Kirk, the idea that these beings had an interest in procreation with humans was not mere superstition. He perceived in these stories an ancient connection between the human and the supernatural that might have a real basis. The Bible, in the book of Genesis, mentions the Nephilim, born from the union of the sons of God and the daughters of men, and are described as mighty giants. This concept of hybrid beings between humans and superior entities also appears in Sumerian tablets, where the Anunnaki are described as interacting closely with humans to influence their evolution. Kirk observed these coincidences with fascination, seeing in them a possible confirmation that the legends of hybridization between humans and non-human beings were not isolated myths but fragments of a shared story repeated in different cultures. The hybridization accounts spoke not only of a physical union but also of a spiritual or psychic connection. People who claim to have ancestry from these beings often describe themselves as possessing extraordinary abilities, such as clairvoyance, healing ability, or remote vision. These gifts seem to be inheritances from their non-human ancestors, and those who possessed them were considered intermediaries between the physical and spiritual worlds. Kirk documented these testimonies with respect, neither judging nor minimizing his informant's experiences, allowing him to approach a deeper interpretation of hybridization. To him, these abilities were not random but represented a way of maintaining a connection between both worlds. Through these stories, Kirk saw how hybridization became a bridge between the human and the supernatural, allowing certain people to access knowledge and abilities that exceeded the limits of the normal. Kirk also found a symbolic aspect in these hybridization stories, as they seemed to represent a fusion between two distinct realities, the human and the non-human. In many of the stories he collected, people descending from these unions were often described as having a different perception of the world, a kind of second sight that allowed them to see what others could not. This detail made Kirk wonder if these beings sought something specific in humanity, a trait or ability they could combine with their own to obtain some mutual benefit. In this sense, hybridization not only represented a physical exchange, but an integration of qualities that enriched both sides. Hybridization thus becomes a symbol of a complex and ambiguous relationship in which humans and non-human beings are intertwined in a bond that challenges our traditional notions of purity and separation between species. The legends about hybridization were also tinged with fear and ambiguity, as these unions were not always perceived as entirely positive. In some cases, people saw these beings as predators or manipulators, using humans for their own purposes and leaving them marked or different after their encounters. Stories of women taken to have offspring with these beings were not always told as positive experiences. Sometimes, they were described as abductions or even traumatic events. Kirk documented these dark aspects, aware that hybridization was not always an act of love or peaceful union but could, in some cases, represent an invasive and dominant interaction. This duality in hybridization stories shows that relationships between humans and non-human beings can be symbiotic and conflictual, adding a layer of complexity to interpreting these stories. The idea of hybridization between humans and non-human beings, though reinterpreted in modern times as encounters with aliens, continues to have a profound meaning in today's culture. Hybridization stories raise questions about the origin of certain human abilities, such as intuition, clairvoyance, or spiritual connection. To Kirk, this possibility of a mix between the human and non-human opened an enriching perspective on human potential and the nature of our existence. By meticulously and empathetically documenting these stories, Kirk invites us to reflect on the nature of humanity and whether our origins may be more intertwined with other realities than we imagine. His work on hybridization becomes a call to question the boundaries between the human and the supernatural and to accept that perhaps the history of humanity is filled with connections to the unknown that we are still far from understanding. Robert Kirk's work has had a lasting influence on popular culture and the way we perceive the supernatural world. Although his work did not gain widespread circulation in his time, its later publication aroused the interest of researchers, writers, and artists who found in his stories a fascinating universe of invisible beings and parallel worlds. Today, Kirk's figure and his concept of the Sith have been taken up in various theories, some suggesting that his descriptions of these beings may have influenced modern myths of aliens and abductions. Contemporary culture, especially in science fiction and fantasy genres, has adopted elements of his writings, reimagining them as aliens or visitors from other dimensions. This phenomenon shows how Kirk's ideas have transcended the boundaries of his time to become part of the popular imagination and a reference for those interested in exploring the limits of reality. One of the clearest examples of Kirk's influence on modern culture is the interest in so-called visitors from other worlds. In science fiction works, both literary and cinematic, it is common to find characters and situations that seem inspired by Kirk's accounts of the Sith. The notion of beings coexisting with us in an invisible reality or in parallel dimensions has been a source of inspiration for authors and directors. Movies and series about aliens, abductions, and alternate realities often explore themes Kirk documented centuries ago, though in a language more adapted to modern science and technology. This phenomenon reflects how Kirk's legacy has found a place in popular culture, where the idea of superior intelligences coexisting with us continues to captivate audiences and fuel interest in the unknown. In addition to his influence in science fiction, Kirk's work has impacted how we interpret ancient legends and mythologies. His research, centered on Scottish folklore, helped preserve his land's cultural richness and opened the door to comparative studies with other traditions. Today, Kirk's work is considered a reference in folklore studies and has been taken into account by researchers seeking to understand the common structure of supernatural stories in different cultures. By studying stories about non-human beings from Scotland, Kirk not only preserved a valuable fragment of his country's history, but also laid the foundations for the modern study of myths and legends in their relationship with human psychology. His influence can be seen in the work of researchers like Carl Jung and Joseph Campbell, who analyzed myths and archetypes from a universal and symbolic perspective. The concept of the Sith that Kirk described in his writings has also found an echo in modern popular culture, where the term has been reimagined and popularized in various forms. The coincidence with the Sith from the Star Wars saga, though in a completely different context, reflects the universal appeal of a being inhabiting a parallel world and interacting with humans in an ambiguous manner. While there is no direct connection between Kirk's work and this saga, it is interesting to observe how his term has come to resonate in popular culture, becoming a symbol of hidden powers and mysterious intelligences. This indirect connection is a testament to Kirk's persistent influence on the collective imagination and how his research has managed to transcend generations, keeping alive the idea that there are forces beyond our understanding. Robert Kirk has also become a symbol of intellectual and spiritual courage. Through his life and work, Kirk demonstrated that it is possible to question established beliefs and explore topics that, although considered taboo, contain profound knowledge about human nature. His commitment to truth, respect for his community's experiences, and bravery in challenging his time's prejudices make him an admirable figure, a forerunner of the modern scientific and spiritual mentality. Today, his legacy inspires those seeking to understand the supernatural world and explore the limits of human perception. Kirk shows us that we need not blindly accept the unknown. We can approach it with a mix of curiosity and respect, trusting that truth always finds a way, even in the darkest and most mysterious territories. Kirk's impact on popular culture is also a reminder that truth and knowledge can remain hidden for years but eventually find a way to come to light. His manuscript, which remained hidden for more than a century, represents a message for all those who seek answers in unconventional subjects. His life and work teach us that the pursuit of knowledge is never in vain, and that although some topics may seem dark or incomprehensible, it is always worth exploring them. Kirk invites us to see the world with open eyes, not to fear the unknown, and to recognize that reality may be far vaster and more complex than our minds can encompass. His legacy is an invitation to be brave explorers of the unknown, to listen to the whispers of the invisible, and always, with humility and perseverance, to seek out the hidden truths surrounding our existence.